Okay. Great.
Good afternoon, listeners. Thank you for tuning in again for another episode of Legal Talk with Patricia Bryan at our new time of 3 to 4 p.m. on Bobo 89.1 FM. I hope everyone had a great and safe weekend. As usual, I want to remind everyone that it would be nice if you can find a nonprofit organization of your choice and either volunteer some time or much of your hard-earned money. I know that's very hard today, but there are organizations out there that could use your help. I would also like to encourage our persons in the legal field, or attorneys and lawyers, to get in touch with the Legal Befrienders Clinic and the Cayman Islands Legal Assistance Clinic. They are in need of attorneys for volunteering for their free legal clinics that they offer to the public, whether residents or Caymanians living here on island. And this afternoon, we have in studio with us is Mr. Christopher Perry of Samson Law Associates. And of course, this is the second time we've had someone on the show from Samson Law. I'm not sure if they love the show or they just love to come on
We're
and
big
talk about
fans.
topics. Thank you. But Christopher here, if I may call him Christopher,
Of course.
is an attorney that is focused in the litigation practice. And I understand Samson Law is delving into other areas than what it is infamously known for in the Cayman Islands, and that is criminal law. And this is encouraging news. It would be nice if most firms on island would delve into more practices in not just a specialized area. That is something I want to advocate for myself. It gives more opportunities to clients. But I will go ahead and let Christopher introduce himself. Christopher, how we do it on the show is you give a brief synopsis of
Of course.
yourself, a personal background. You don't have to give away too much, but just so our listeners can get to know you, the person, you, the attorney, on a personal level. Here in Cayman, it's always a personalized thing. Of course, you've been here for quite a long time. So just give our listeners and viewers a brief synopsis of your personal background.
Of course. Well, good afternoon, Patricia, and thank you very much for inviting me on to the show today. I've actually practiced as an attorney here in the Cayman Islands since 2021. So first arrived on island in the midst of the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
I had the joys of quarantining when I got here. I remember that vividly because I quarantined in one of the condos close to 7 Mile Beach, and it was one of those things where I could see but I couldn't touch, and I had all that period of time where I was raring to explore the island and get to understand where I'd moved to.
Did you get any free food? I'm sorry.
I didn't get any free food, but I did get regular deliveries. I remember the food delivery guys. There was a little protocol there where they would deliver food.
Right.
But yeah, it was good, but it feels like a lifetime ago now.
Yes,
Um, But as I say, so I arrived in 2021, practiced as an attorney here since that time. Prior to that, I was practicing from the UK predominantly. There was a small period where I did some work in other jurisdictions, but predominantly in the UK, where I was practiced as a barrister, and that was for over 20 years.
wow.
I think I just got to a stage in my life where I got fed up with the rain,
The rain.
although we've had plenty of rain here recently.
Yes, and the cold.
But certainly not. So we certainly don't get the cold like we do in the UK. So I felt it was right to make a change. So I moved over here with my fiance, who's a doctor. She's now my wife.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you very much. We got married in April. It was very, very nice.
Oh, it's very new.
Yeah,
So
very,
definitely
very new.
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I say April. It's almost 6 months. It's amazing
Yes.
how fast time flies.
Yes.
I can't believe we're seeing Christmas decorations in the shops again. It feels like it was only Christmas like last month
Last month.
before.
I agree.
Life goes so fast sometimes.
I agree.
but I've always practiced in the area of civil litigation.
Okay.
Um, Civil litigation and family law, they're new areas for Samson Law. Samson Law, just talking a little bit about the firm, I mean,
Absolutely. That's what I expect. Yes.
many of the listeners will probably know of the firm and certainly will know of the name. Lloyd Sampson's been synonymous with criminal law
He is.
for a number of years.
Yes.
But Lloyd and Prather Bodden set up the firm in 2017,
Right.
and that was following off the back of Lloyd and Prather running the criminal law team at Samson McGraw. And some
Right.
people may remember Samson McGraw,
Yes, I
as
do.
sometimes happens with firms, there's mergers, there's splits, and
Yes.
ultimately Samson Law was the if one could say the criminal department of Samson McGraw moving in a different direction.
Right.
But I'm very proud to be there. One thing um, I think a lot of people will agree is when it comes to criminal law, Samson Law really are the market leaders in that type of in that area of law.
Right.
If you look at some of the high-profile cases that take place, and we're not just talking about first instance cases
Right.
in Grand
Right.
Court, but looking at cases before the Court of Appeal or even the Privy Council
Right.
when they came out recently. Um, Samson Law were involved in a lot of those cases.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I'm very proud to work where I do. But I
Yes.
think the firm took the view is, well, we need to branch out into other areas of
Absolutely.
law.
Yes. Yes. Because
Um,
they've done so well. I mean, Lloyd, Lloyd himself, and then Prathna coming up behind him, and as the other attorneys come on board, they're setting a different type of precedent
yeah,
in the legal field. So
I definitely agree with that. And I mean, since 2017, the firm itself has doubled in size.
yes.
So that sort of shows the good work and the path that has already been cast before I joined the firm. But I'm very happy to be there. Now we have the new civil litigation department with also family law, so covering divorce applications in relation to children.
Okay. Okay.
And there can be a helpful crossover there with some of the criminal law
Right. Yes.
aspects. Often there's children aspects that will arise when there's criminal proceedings.
Right. Yes.
But also we're going to cover the corporate commercial side of things as well. So
Okay.
it's a very exciting time to be at the firm.
Yes. When people hear corporate commercial, they start to think, boring stuff. I'm sorry to say that, but I've heard it so many times. So we're going to delve a little bit uh, into the litigation side with you
Absolutely.
today. One thing I wanted to ask you though, are you involved in anything community-wise, so our listeners can know that you are a guy that's involved, whether sports or just any clubs or anything like
Well,
that?
absolutely. I mean, I think when you move to a new place to live, you've got
Hmm.
to throw yourself into that. You've got to throw
Absolutely.
yourself into the community, throw yourself into all of the wonderful activities that we have.
Right.
So, although I'm not a swimmer myself, my wife definitely is. So we're a keen supporter of the aquatics and associations. We very
Okay.
much get involved with assisting with their activities. I can't quite believe it. It still seems unbelievable. But I tried my first season of Gaelic football this year,
Okay.
and my team, I can't believe it, but we won the league. So that was quite good. First time lucky. I think only time lucky, to be honest.
Yes.
And as much as I was part of the team, I think I was supported by the other members of our team far more. I think they claim they can say they put their hands on the victory far more than I did. But
Yeah.
certainly
Okay.
good to get involved. But one other area that's very close to my heart is the flying club. Now, we've had a flying club here in Cayman on and off since the 60s.
Okay. I was not aware of
And
that.
it sort of it arrives for a while and then falls away. But we're in the process of re-establishing the Flying Club as a non-profit organization. And one of the things that we're very is very important to us is not whilst we want people to enjoy general aviation and we want to promote general aviation within the Cayman Islands. We've been organising discovery flights so people can fly around the island, have a
Okay.
tour of the island in the Cessnas that we have access to. But one of the things that's very important to us is we're having developing a scholarship program, which will allow young Caymanians, if they want to learn to fly, they will be able to do all of their training, get all of their hours, do everything that they need to do at no cost to them through the Flying Club.
I absolutely
Um,
love that. Anything free to help our young people or anyone that's interested, nonprofit, I am absolutely for
yeah.
that, and I commend the. Is it the Flying Club?
Yes, the Cayman Islands Flying Club.
Cayman Islands Flying Club. Well, Cayman Islands Flying Club, you have my support
Oh,
in that,
thank you.
especially if you're going to offer a scholarship.
Yeah,
So we're giving you a shout out here through Mr. Christopher Perry on our show,
thank you.
and we'll let him continue to give us some background about Samson law and our topic today.
Well, as you said, Patricia, we're going to cover litigation today, and litigation we can all um, uh, kind of associate with that. Maybe not if you, fortunately, I hope you might not have found yourself involved in litigation. I mean,
Right.
litigation is always fighting, it's
Right.
arguing.
Right.
So it can be quite unpleasant to find yourself embroiled in any form of litigation. But
So for the sake of our listeners, just give us a layman's term of litigation.
well, litigation, um, I guess the best way of describing it is where there is an adversarial process, where there is a fight, where
Okay.
there is a winner and a loser.
Okay.
So, in a case where if you're arguing over a contract, or even as we're talking today, we're looking at auto insurance. Litigation, in the sense of this, is one party believes that they've been wronged by another,
Okay.
and then they seek damages and compensation for that wrong. So we have to show a few legal principles. So we have to show that the at fault party, the negligent party, when we're dealing with personal injury, owed a duty of care to the person looking to make
Right.
a claim. So,
So
um,
it's not sorry, it's not where we have in the opposite side of the spectrum criminal law where we have the prosecution bringing the matter to prosecute someone for a criminal offense. It's more you as the one party's lawyer, and then the other party has
yeah,
their own lawyer, and it's a
and
back and
that's
forth.
that's it. So
Okay.
if we're acting for a plaintiff, the plaintiff is the party that's bringing
Bringing
the
the
claim.
action, yes.
So a plaintiff will bring a claim. This, quite often, it doesn't always involve the courts, because
Right.
prior to getting involved with a court process, there is a pre-litigation process where parties attempt to resolve their disputes without concerning the court at all.
Is that like a mediation type
It's
process?
not so much mediation, although in some areas of litigation, mediation would be appropriate. It
Okay.
doesn't tend to happen in personal injury so much, or certainly outside of the very high value catastrophic type injury cases.
Okay.
Um, it's more, you would start the process with a letter of claim, which is, or a letter before action, as is otherwise known as, and that will be sent to the other party, setting out all of the pertinent facts of why, as a claimant, you are seeking damages, you're seeking financial compensation for what might have happened, and then you give a period of time for that to be considered. Normally, these letters, in the context perhaps of a car accident, a motor vehicle accident, that document would be forwarded on to an insurance company, and then they will investigate and determine whether liability is going to be admitted, but also look at, and one of the areas we're going to talk about today, look at whether there is contractual reasons why an insurance company might not have to settle a case or pay out a claim.
Right.
And then they look at the value of the case, and they want to satisfy themselves that somebody has been injured the way they say. And quite often there will be an assessment of the value of compensation. And it's not completely sort of
So in other words, they want to make sure what you're claiming, that's exactly what the amount of the claim validates.
exactly. But as ever, whenever lawyers are involved, things are not always black and white, and
Right.
lawyers love the grey areas. We thrive on the grey
In the
areas.
gray areas.
So we have personal injury damages for what we call pain, suffering, and loss of immunity. That's the physical pain and impairment, and inability to do things that you might suffer as a result of
Right.
an accident. You can't ever be put back in the position that you would have been had the accident never occurred. Someone can't rewind the clock and take away that pain and suffering.
Right. Right.
So all that the court can do, ultimately, if it gets that far, is put a financial value on it, give
Right.
someone some financial compensation so they feel a little bit better about it.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
quite often with these sorts of cases, people probably think, I wish I'd never been involved in that accident.
Yes.
But we can't do that. We can't put them back in a situation where it never occurred.
Agreed.
So um, we um, um, we can claim for damages uh, to, to compensate, make someone feel better about the fact that they've been involved
In
in this type of incident.
injured. Yeah.
And the amount of damages is quite interesting. Um, uh, there has to be some guidance because we want some degree of consistency and some degree of being able to predict what a case might be worth.
Right.
And of course, a plaintiff lawyer would want to recover as much as they possibly can for their clients. An insurance lawyer would probably want to limit their client's liability as much as they probably can. So, but there has to be a
Right.
frame of reference
Right.
for how we get there.
Right.
And
Yes.
in fact, there's a useful it's a little book actually. It comes out every year or so, and it's called the Judicial College Guidelines, and it's actually published by the Judicial College in the UK.
Right.
And it's almost it's about 50 or 60 pages long. It always comes in very bright colors. I think it's purple at the moment.
Oh.
And in that book, it has a price for everything. So if you can imagine somebody who has a soft tissue or whiplash type injury to their neck or their back, there's a price for that. Right up to there is a price if somebody loses their life. There is a price if somebody was to lose their hand, if somebody was to lose their leg. And so usually this document, it will have a range because there are different degrees of injury,
Injuries.
even
Yes.
where the injury itself is quite
Right.
specific. So we look at that, and then a plaintiff lawyer would argue why the client's injuries fall higher in the range and lower, and the
So
insurance lawyer lower in the range.
so in other words, if a hand is injured and it's just sprained, or if it's just broken, or it's partially severed or totally severed,
Absolutely.
there's different
Different
amounts.
thresholds for all of
Okay.
that. So,
Okay.
I mean, I could give you an example that I think the listeners could relate to. Is let's say, for instance, scarring on the body,
Right.
and that can happen in a variety of um, accidents. But let's say in a road traffic accident with glass and things of that nature, there can be scarring. So it's relevant where that scarring is. So if it, for instance, is on the face,
Right. Yes.
that would be something that would attract a higher level of damages than if it's maybe on the chest.
Chest. Yes.
And then there is a difference between men and women depending on areas of the body that might normally
I
be
can see that.
exposed versus
Yes.
covered up. And um, things of that nature. Or taking another example, if there's an injury to the hand, like you just mentioned, is it your dominant hand? Is that the hand you use
Right.
every day, or
Right.
is it your? I'm a right-hander, so if I injured my right hand, that would attract a higher level of damages than if I injured my
Your
left.
left hand. Okay.
But it's we have a starting point within the Judicial College guidelines, and then thereafter we sometimes look at case law, which gives us an idea of how those guidelines have been interpreted in practical terms by judges.
Right.
And then we reflect because this is a document that's produced in the UK, and the UK has a very different. It's very different in terms of cost of living and other things. And
Absolutely. Yes.
because of the cost of living situation here in Cayman, an uplift is applied to any figures that are appropriate in the UK. And traditionally, there's a case law that suggests 10% is the appropriate level of uplift, and that tends
Uplift here in the Cayman
here in the
Islands.
Cayman
Is
Islands.
it because of the value of our dollar?
Um, well, as the dollar changes, it's kind of settled a little bit now, but it's more to reflect simply, as they say, it's $8 for a lettuce these days, $9 for a cauliflower.
Cost of living.
Yeah, the cost of living. Where
Okay.
you can get a lettuce in the UK for a pound,
Okay.
Um, but there's always argument on these things, and as you would expect, lawyers doing their job properly,
Yes.
plaintiff plaintiffs are always going to try and do the best they can for their client, and insurance lawyers are trying to do the best for their client.
Yes.
And maybe when it gets to the courts, usually the judges, they try and deal with matters or, as fairly as they can,
Yes.
and more often than not, we find ourselves somewhere in the middle.
Right, because you don't have to say it, but I can say, insurance usually protects their own interest.
Yeah,
Everyone really in the
yeah,
courtroom tries to protect everyone's own
yeah.
interest, and yes, we do be mindful that the judges do try to be the most fair and impartial as
Hmm.
possible. So, but this topic of insurance, auto insurance, now, what is your take on that?
Well, one of the areas that um, is important to really just set out at the start is we were talking about litigation and how it's an adversarial process here. There's a winner and there's a loser. Somebody has to do something wrong, and then you claim against them based on the wrong that they've committed. That isn't the case in all jurisdictions. And look, for instance, if anybody has traveled to or has visited or lived in Australia, the approach is entirely different there. In Australia, um, anybody that's injured in a road traffic accident, regardless of blame, is entitled to bring a claim. And they have a scheme there called the compulsory third party scheme.
Oh my goodness, please do not put ideas into law enforcement and the government of the Cayman Islands because that would be needless to say. Anyway, continue.
uh, but the important thing is here. Let's say that an accident occurs, and we're going to have two individuals at the very least,
Right,
maybe
yes.
more, but two individuals at the very least who are going to be involved, and invariably two individuals that are going to be injured. Under our system, under the adversarial or the litigation system, the driver who was at fault for the collision, they're told that you're the author of your own misfortune.
Oh
It's
wow.
your fault. You can't recover anything from anyone. But the non-fault party, they can make a claim against the at-fault party.
Okay.
So whoever caused the accident, we claim against them, and more generally, we claim against their
Right.
insurance.
Which makes
But
sense.
in Australia, if you had two parties that were involved in an accident, the way in which the law treats it there is if you're injured, you're entitled to compensation regardless of whose fault
Or
the
whose
accident
fault it
is.
was. Okay.
Um, and it's an interesting one. I've always worked. The UK is the same here in terms of the adversarial process. I've always worked on that basis of um, the at fault approach because it almost if you cause an accident by your own negligence or your stupidity or not paying attention, is it right that you should recover damages as a result of that? And Australia take this holistic approach where it doesn't matter if you're injured, then you're entitled to damages. But I suspect for many, and Australia is relatively unique. I think there are a couple of other jurisdictions,
Certainly
but
sounds unique.
um, in their approach, the rest of the world more or less adopt more of
The same
more of
process.
the approach that we have
Yes.
here. But the starting point with insurance, we all have to have it, right?
Right.
You'll be aware we've got the Vehicle Insurance Third Party Risks Law 2012, a snappy piece of legislation. Section 3 of that law makes it clear that if you want to use a motor vehicle on the road, you have to have a policy of
Auto
insurance
insurance.
that
Yes.
covers third party risks. And if you don't, it's a criminal offence. You're liable on conviction to be fined. You can have up to 3 months in prison, and you can be disqualified from driving for a period of time. So the law is extremely strict here that you must, if you're using a vehicle on the public road, have insurance.
It used to be an automatic disqualification. I haven't, to be all on it, to be honest, I didn't get the chance to actually review the most recent act that's in effect, but it's good that they have it now where it's subject to a
Mm-hmm.
disqualification and not an automatic because it was an automatic disqualification many years ago in the early 2000s. So anyway,
Well,
sorry.
I think with these things, it's often good that the court maintains a discretion
Right.
because there can be circumstances perhaps when laws are passed that is hard to predict.
Yes.
But you might find a situation where somebody finds themselves driving without insurance, but perhaps there is some significant mitigation
Yes,
there.
because it could have expired and maybe you were off island or maybe you forgot, something to that effect.
And you want to have the ability where a tribunal, um, did, a sensible body to determine these things can have all of the information, all of the
Yes.
facts, and then make a decision. I think things where it is taken out of their hands, I think quite often is a bad thing, because we have very good, very experienced judges here on Ireland at all levels,
Yes.
and I think the more that is left to them to determine based upon the parameters within the law, I think the better it is.
Yes, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Um, but just kind of looking at the claims process. So let's say,
Yes, that's very important.
um, you've been involved and unfortunately been involved in an accident. What do you do about it? So the starting point obviously is to approach an attorney to assist you. And that attorney, as I said before, would prepare a claim against the at-fault driver.
Yes.
So you have to be able to blame another driver
Right.
in order to make a claim,
Right.
contrasting to the Australian system. Now, provided that the vehicle, the at-fault vehicle, driven by the at-fault driver, when I say at fault, they don't have to have been completely at fault.
Right.
They just have to have been at fault to some degree.
Right.
So there's many accidents where it's really a combination of factors that have caused the accident. And you might say, well, one party wasn't looking where they were going, but the other party was going too fast. And as a result of that, it's determined that the accident was 50-50. It was both parties' faults. Then in those circumstances, the plaintiff is still able to make a claim. But if the other driver was only 50% to blame, let's say, then they would only have to pay 50% of the reasonable level of damages.
Okay.
So that's how that's done. So, but a claim is made against the at-fault driver.
So, Christopher, I just want to throw this in there quickly. We want to be clear that one of the first things to do when you are involved in an auto accident is to consult on it. Well, we would say the first thing to do is to exchange information.
Yes.
Do not move your vehicle, take pictures.
Absolutely right.
Get all of, well, I just said that, exchange information, take pictures of the damages on either party. We do know that there are some parties who get pretty rowdy when you're wanting to take pictures, but as best as you can, take photographs, exchange information, make sure you catch the registration of the vehicles, all vehicles involved, get the names, and next to, well, it's up in the air whether you should consult your insurance first or consult an attorney first. What would you suggest?
I would say in the first instance, it's very common here in Cayman when an accident occurs that parties will contact the police.
Right.
And I think the reason that's done is that just the reassurance that there is a record of the fact that the collision occurred.
Right, I should have put that in there. I forgot to mention. Call the police to have a record of the accident and have it documented for sure.
And when the police arrive, as you say, when it comes to exchanging information, taking pictures, just the fact that an accident's occurred, tempers may be raised.
Yes.
And just having the police there, I think, has a calming influence, if I can
Right.
put it in that way,
Yes.
on what is going on. So invariably, that is the first thing to do, is to call the police.
Call the police, yeah.
But I think the examples that you gave there of the type of information that you need to record, pictures, a picture speaks 1,000 words, as they say. It can be extremely helpful for pictures, and it's very important that those pictures are taken before the vehicles are moved, because the position of a vehicle immediately after a collision gives a good idea of where everybody was, what the direction of travel was, and it can be very, very important in establishing whose fault the accident was. So That's extremely important.
Well, one of the things I've seen happen in auto accidents, and I've seen it in Florida and I've seen it in Cayman, where it's encouraged. Well, if your car doesn't sustain significant damage, it's okay to move the car if it happens in the road.
Yeah.
And then what we find happens after that, there's not there's not too much evidential, if any, damage on the exterior, but later on there may be evidential damage on the inner part of the vehicle.
Absolutely.
You know how the impacts work for auto accidents, and there's a question: if you move your car, how can we gauge the way that the accident happened
Hmm.
and that sort of thing. So it's very important, as you're indicating, to call the police, next to take photos, and so especially photos are very important in today's incidents of accidents, because everyone is always claiming, well, it wasn't my fault, so and make sure that informations are exchanged, and then or after,
Hmm.
call an attorney, try to get an attorney on speed dial.
Absolutely. I think just one other point that just occurs to me as we're talking on evidence gathering is dash cams. And dash cams are
Yes,
extremely popular now.
yes,
They don't cost very much. You can get them for like 30, $40 these
right,
days. And um, that's the sort of black box, if you like, the equivalent of the black boxes that we hear about in
absolutely,
aircraft. And they usually sort of have a rolling recording, so you can just set it up there and forget about it. But
yes,
then when you are involved in an incident like this, the fact that it's a moving picture, that can be extremely helpful
okay,
to establish what happened and whose fault it is. So always want to consider. Um, I mean, I'll give an example of that. Traditionally, we would say that if you were to reverse into a vehicle that was behind you, then that would be your fault. Okay.
right,
Um, if you drive into the vehicle in front of you, that's your fault. Okay, if that
right,
makes sense.
yes, yes,
Um, so, but it's the same damage in the same places on both vehicles.
right,
So you
yes,
can have a situation where, let's say, for argument's sake, the truth of this situation is car one in front reverses and
into
hits car
car.
two behind.
How do you tell?
Um, car two that's behind says, "Yeah, he reversed into me," but the driver of car one in front says, "No, it didn't happen like that at all.
He
Car
ran he ran
two
into me.
behind just ran into the back of me." We're going to have exactly the same damage on both vehicles, and the
Okay,
photographs afterwards are not going to address that.
right,
I mean, we look at when we're arguing cases like that, what is more plausible, what is more likely, because when the court determines fault in a case like this, it's done not on the criminal standard, um, which is here beyond reasonable doubt. A judge would have to be, or a jury would have to be sure of guilt before they could convict. We don't have that in civil, otherwise, we'd
okay,
never decide anything.
right,
So we have what's called balance of probabilities. We have argument one on here, argument two here. Which one does the judge
right,
prefer?
yes,
And the judge, and it can be very, very fine. The judge can say, well, they're both plausible. It could have happened either way. The photographs would
would
be the
confirm
same,
the
would
yes,
be consistent either way. But I don't think driver A in front would have reversed in those
right,
circumstances. He had no reason to reverse. So I, just by a little bit, Pip, I think driver two is to be preferred, and
yes,
cases can be resolved that way, and sometimes because they have to be determined in that way, the courts don't always get it right.
yes,
The
yes,
court wasn't there, the court doesn't know, but a
right,
decision has to be made. So dash cams are always a good idea, I think.
okay,
Um, but once this claim is put together, provided that a vehicle has got insurance, and we'll turn on in a bit later. I think we'll look into what happens where there's no insurance.
right,
Where there is insurance, an insurance company will deal with that claim um, along the lines as I talked about before. But one thing that I think is quite important, I think many of your listeners may not be aware of this, is that when it comes to dealing with and investigating claims where there is insurance on the vehicle, insurance has been bought and paid for on a particular vehicle, and let's say it's beyond any doubt, any question that the vehicle we're talking about, the driver of that vehicle caused the accident, let's say. But what happens if the driver of the vehicle that caused the accident hasn't complied with the terms of the insurance policy?
And what does that mean exactly?
Well, it not often when we sign up for bank accounts, insurance products, really anything, when we're asked to look at terms and conditions, how much of us really read through all of that? And lawyers
Right.
can be as guilty as that as anybody else, right? When we're signing up for an app on our phone, asks us to confirm the terms and
Right.
conditions, just like everybody else, we
No one
scroll
does
to the
that.
end. It's important to note, though, just on that front, that not reading terms and conditions doesn't amount to a defense.
Right.
If you sign them, if you click that accept box, you're
Ignorance isn't a defense.
exactly, you are bound by those terms. But in these circumstances, the terms of the policy will say what's required, and a policy will normally, I think, the most typical area where there is non-compliance with the terms of the policy is it will require a driver to have a valid driving license.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so if let's say that you have you have insurance, you lend your car to somebody else. They think they've got a valid driving license. You think they've got a valid driving license, but the fact is they haven't. Their license is expired, or um, we have we to a certain extent we have
Or it could have been suspended
could have been
or
suspended.
disqualified.
Yeah. Um, Lots of reasons why somebody might not have a driving license, but if they don't have a driving license, then there has been non-compliance with the terms of the policy.
Right.
And then in those circumstances, the insurance company perfectly legitimately, I should add, and perfectly lawfully can say, because you haven't complied with the terms of the policy, because the driver did not have a valid driving license, then we do not have to indemnify the driver.
So let me get this clear quickly. So when an insurance policy is issued, it covers the vehicle, but also that policy encompasses that whoever's driving the vehicle
Yeah,
should be legally qualified to drive.
exactly. And
So
not just qualified, but hold a license.
right. So even though it's because the misconceptions I know some people have is, oh, I have insurance, I can drive your car.
Mm-hmm.
Or I have insurance, I can drive my cousin's car.
Yeah.
But in reality, insurance is only covering a specific vehicle, but also a vehicle that has a person that's lawfully qualified or lawfully
Mm-hmm.
liable, hold a lawful driver's license, valid, up to date
Absolutely.
driver's
Yeah.
license. Okay.
I mean I picked that example because that's one that's pretty universal.
Right.
Um, every policy of insurance, it is up to the insurance company itself to decide on what their terms are, what they're
Right.
covering, what they're not covering. And some policies will cover any driver as long as they're over, say, 25,
Right.
or other policies will be specific that only covers named drivers.
Right.
So it's important to check and understand. But there are policies that if you have insurance on your own vehicle and you borrow a friend's vehicle,
Yes.
there are policies that will allow you to do that.
Right. So
But
if
there's
you
also
drive,
policies that won't.
right. So if you drive someone, because the misconception I've understood is like, it's a one size fits all,
Yeah,
and we
that's
know
not
that
right.
that's not right. That's not the truth.
So
Okay.
we kind of we're finding situations here. I mean, again, looking at these where it's so important to check what the insurance coverage is,
Right.
and where people can find themselves where we're not talking about people necessarily that have sought that aren't complying with the law, that have set out not to comply to the law, have just said, you know what, I'm not getting insurance. I'm just going to drive my car without insurance. Um, there are those circumstances, and they are numerous on Ireland. But there are also situations where people find themselves um, not complying with the terms of their insurance when they thought that they did. And I think that's an important message to check and be sure what's covered and what isn't.
Right, yes. And most people are just wanting, especially in the younger age categories and young drivers and, getting into their 20s and 30s, they're just happy to have insurance or think that they do have insurance.
Yeah,
And they don't, I've realized there's really no teaching of, as you said, to read the terms and conditions of your insurance and to make sure you understand everything before you actually get into an accident or if and
absolutely.
when you get into an accident.
Because of course you find these things out after the event when
Yes.
it's too late. That's when somebody points out that you haven't complied with the terms of your um, motor insurance,
Yes.
and that's a point where you find yourself in difficulty. So it's with these things, you want to be um, preemptive and be sure that everything is as you believe it to be before an accident occurs, because it's too late to do anything about it after the event.
Okay. I just want to let you continue to get into
Well,
the thoughts because you have a lot of good stuff here, very informative information that our listeners and viewers need to know.
well, just again touching on this situation. So where an insurance company finds that the driver of a vehicle that has insurance, for argument's sake, doesn't have a driving license, they would refuse to, or they could refuse to indemnify the claim. And that's something, as an attorney here in the Cayman Islands, that I've seen quite a lot. And it might surprise those listening to the show quite how often this sort of situation occurs. But the effect of that is the person that has been caught up in an accident, who's an innocent victim of an accident that wasn't their fault, caused by a vehicle that has insurance, they're left with um, an inability to make a claim against the insurance company. So what they're left with is making a claim against the individual driver who caused the accident.
Okay, okay.
But in those circumstances, they can have really limited prospects of success. There's a word as lawyers use that the driver might be impecunious. That's just a lawyer's word to say that they don't have sufficient money or assets to be able to settle a claim. And if you look at medical bills and the size of these things, um, somebody on a low wage, a young person with no savings, for instance, they would have no ability to be able to settle a claim. So the person that's been caught up in this accident, the innocent party, is left with um, no recourse at all in those
Right,
circumstances.
yes.
And that, I think some people might find that surprising, to think that a vehicle has insurance, yet the accident wasn't their fault, but they still can't make any claim against anybody. And look at
This is
cases.
quite discouraging.
Yeah, and there are accidents. We all think about road safety here in Cayman, and I think many of your listeners will have thoughts on road safety, and we see the number of accidents that we unfortunately see on our roads. But there are different degrees of harm. Unfortunately, we see a number of fatal accidents on our roads, and we hear about these. And beyond the fatal accidents are people that have had catastrophic injuries and life changing injuries, people who have been um, left disabled, permanently disabled as a result of an accident, people who can never work again. And for somebody caught up in a situation like that, where an accident has happened that wasn't their fault, it was entirely at the fault of somebody else, and yet they can't make a claim, that I think some people would find surprising.
Yes.
And the thing is I think it's worth remembering, when it comes to being an innocent victim of somebody else's negligence, an innocent victim of an accident, we don't get to choose whether we are the victim or not.
Absolutely.
There is no discrimination. Any of us, wherever we are, could find ourselves equally in this situation
Yes. Yes.
through no fault of our own. And um, um, I think it's scary, really, because there's nothing we can do about it. If somebody has decided to get behind the wheel of a car when they haven't got a driving license, they know they haven't, or they've forgotten to renew it, or whatever it might be, that, this type of situation could occur. And I think the reason I raised this as quite an interesting issue is because the law is different here
Yes.
to how it is in many other places. So we've given the example of, if we can call it a very left field jurisdiction like Australia
Yes.
with their non-fault. Really, this jurisdiction is almost left field in terms of how um, insurance, third-party liabilities are dealt with. So a third-party liability is if you cause an accident, any third party, any innocent victim, that's the liability to them. Um, and I say that because most jurisdictions, many jurisdictions, have um, the protections in place by legislation, which kind of overrides the terms and conditions of the insurance.
Yes.
And creates a situation where insurance companies are required to settle claims, regardless of whether somebody has a driving license or not. And I'll give you the example in the UK, the anything to do with insurance and uh, road traffic liabilities. It's all dealt with largely in the Road Traffic Act, 1988. Now it's over 35 years old, so this is nothing new in the UK. Um, but the effect of that legislation, I could probably talk through it in detail, but I'm sure your listeners might get a little bit bored.
Yes.
And in any event, it doesn't apply here. But the nutshell of that legislation, which is mirrored in lots of other jurisdictions, is where there is insurance coverage on a vehicle, the insurer, the insurance company, must pay the claim together with any legal costs that might have been incurred. And then the insurance company has a right to recover anything they've paid out against the negligent driver. So against the person that didn't have the driving license. The insurance company can seek um, to recover from them, but in the first instance, they have to settle the claim from the innocent victim. And there are exclusions to that.
Right. So, what about when there's no insurance coverage in the vehicle or where the negligent
Well,
driver cannot be identified, such as a hit and run?
well, I think that's a really good point because um, I make the caveat here is we're talking about a situation where there is insurance on the vehicle. What if there isn't? And there's lots of circumstances where we see that, or like you say, that hit and run where you didn't get, they drove off, you didn't get a chance to get their registration. And I think there you contrast, again, I'm sorry to keep using examples from the UK, but the UK, in fact, as far goes 1946. It's quite amazing to think that it's 1946 because the motor car hadn't been around that long in 1946. Yes. But in 1946, the UK established what's called the Motor Insurers Bureau, or the MIB. It's not the Men in Black. And what that would do is it was funded by everybody, by the insurance industry. So a little proportion of everybody's insurance premium would be paid to the MIB, and then they set up a collective fund and would administer these claims where somebody had no insurance or you couldn't trace them. And they say at the moment that roughly about £30 and the dollar, the Cayman Islands dollar and the pound are almost like for like. So an example might be that would cost $30 per year per policy to set up a scheme like that. And that creates that protection where if you kind of put both in place, as you would see in the UK, you find that as long as you are the innocent party, you are going to be able to make a claim.
Right.
And I think there needs to be some debate on that, as to whether we need similar protections um, here. Of course, that comes at a cost, though.
Should Cayman consider increasing protection for victims of road traffic
Well,
accidents?
I think for my
I
part,
say yes.
well, I think for my part, I like getting the information out there so people are informed and know the situation that they're in, because there's two sides to this. Um, if there is an amendment to the law, both in terms of looking at the Motor Insurers Bureau or um, looking at changing insurance liability, that's going to come at a cost, and in
Absolutely.
premiums are going to go up. And there's two arguments to that. Some will say, well, look, I want my cost of living is high enough already. I don't want to be paying any more on my car
Yes.
insurance. But then the other school of thought is that's why we have insurance, to insure us against these risks.
Right.
So I want to be covered against these risks, and if it costs me another $30 a year, I'm going to pay it.
Yes.
But there's a debate to be had, I think.
Yes. And what do you think insurance companies would think about any excuse me any changes here in Cayman?
Well, I should say that Samson Law, we receive instructions from insurance companies. So we will argue both sides of the case. Sometimes our client is the plaintiff, sometimes our client is the insurance company. And I always think that's a very good position to be in as a lawyer, because when you argue both sides of the case, you have that expertise. You know what your opponent is thinking. Um, but so I think we can comment on this. Is insurance companies? I think first and foremost, they don't like surprises.
Of course they do.
And that's not just insurance. I don't think any of us really like it,
No,
unless it's a
well,
nice surprise on
some nice
Christmas
surprise,
Day.
yes.
We don't like them.
Yes.
But so there needs to be a period of consultation and involvement. But ultimately, the way insurance companies look at these things is they look at what their risk is, what
Yes.
they're paying out,
Yes.
and they ensure that the premiums that they receive is sufficient to match the money that they have to pay out,
Right.
plus their profit.
Right.
So as long as these things are done, involving them in a sensible way, the insurance companies are neutral on this, because they say, well, look, it's really okay. Insurance premiums would go up, but to in order to fund these extra layers of risk that insurance companies would suffer.
Right. So, any final feedback you have that you would like to give on this, Chris? I know this is your area of expertise, and you've certainly covered a lot of information for us.
Well,
And
I hope it's been informative. I would be very interesting to see what comments people have
right.
on these insurance issues, and the untraced drivers, uninsured drivers,
Right.
um, refusal to indemnify, and what people think about, should we have a scheme like they do in Australia, a non-fault scheme, or not. I think there's some interesting thoughts in all of that.
Right.
But no, I think we gave some good advice. I do hope that our listeners, I really do not find themselves involved in any road traffic accidents, as a driver, a passenger, pedestrian. Um, but if they do, I hope we've given some good advice on how to deal with that, and some things to think about if they find themselves involved in litigation in this way.
Okay. And for the sake of our listeners, could you just repeat who you are, which firm you're from, how to get in touch with you?
Well, as I said, my name is Christopher Perry. I am an attorney at Samson Law. You can look us up at samsonlawassociates.ky, and we have a full website setting out all our different areas of service and our contact information as well. So we're not just dealing with personal injury or road traffic. As I say, we look at family law, um, civil and commercial, contractual disputes, property disputes, as well as the criminal law that we have been known and are famous for.
Yes, and I must say, on behalf of Samson Law, their website is very user friendly. It's not too often you find a law firm that has such a very easy. It's not cluttered. It's very user friendly. All the information is there for every one of the attorneys that are there, their areas of expertise. And I would encourage every other law firm, if your practices permit you, to let your website be a bit more user friendly. Chris, I want to give you one last opportunity if you have any other closing remarks
I
on your topic
only
there.
to say thank you so much for having me on the show this afternoon. I've really enjoyed talking about it. I hope that the listeners have found the topic interesting. And as I say, I'd be very keen to see people's comments and to get some feedback. But if you find yourself involved in any of these the issues that we've discussed today, then very happy for you to reach out to us.
And what's your email address?
Oh, well, my email address, I didn't know if I should do a shameless plug like
Yes,
that,
well,
but
they
C Perry,
every other
C.
guest gave their email address
Oh,
out.
well, then absolutely, I'm going to join in on that. C Perry at samsonlaw.ky.
And the phone number there?
I don't have the phone
Okay,
number.
they can Google it.
But if you Google Samson Law, we all have Google these days, right? Or
Yes,
Facebook, Google
or
us,
Siri.
and you will have our phone number.
Yes.
But you can get in touch with us through email as well.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for being on the show today. I am sorry that I hope you got all of your um, areas covered. It's been very informative for me. And of course, we could always have you back on for part two if you're interested, because this is a lot of information. I know there are many people who may be listening. I can tell you there's not as much people giving feedback online as people who message and call me or
Oh, wow.
see
Okay.
me on the street. So I will be relaying feedback to you as
Oh,
I get it.
fantastic. Thank you.
But I can tell you the show is watched and listened to, and people are encouraged by the topics, and it would be great to have you back on. Anyone from your firm or from any firms or from any organizations that feel that they have a legal topic that they would like to discuss, it would be great to have you back on, Chris, and have any other guests back on. Thank you very much for listening to another episode of Legal Talk with Patricia Bryan this afternoon. And I hope you got something from the show, and we'll see you this time next week. Have a good evening.